Chapter 1. Maximilian Blackstone wore an expression that Alex couldn't identify. What was it she saw on his face? Alex had never seen that look in his eyes before. Was it lust, love, jealousy, or hatred? She had to get close to him to find out. But she couldn't with Jonas lying, as if in a coma. Hell, he'd had a terrible few days. A new wife on their wedding day killed. Not just killed, but her throat had been cut by her lover. Her disinterested parents, and not to mention a house full of police, threatening to take him to the police station and arrest him if he didn't get out of town, immediately. How much time did they give Jonas? Alex didn't know, but what she did know was Jonas had to go somewhere soon, but where? By the look on Max's face, his twin brother wasn't welcomed back in their family since he'd walked into the unlocked house to see Alex and Jonas asleep in the same bed, with Jonas clutching Alex to his chest. Never mind that they both were clothed. Never mind that Alex never looked at Jonas in any way sexual, but as a tragic figure that she had to protect, and now she would have to protect him against the man he loved and respected the most, his brother Max. Looking up at Max, Alex felt a surge of desire that she'd never felt before. She touched his face with a warm palm and knowing glance. She knew what he desired, even if he didn't want to admit to it. It was sexual, and it was hot. Max stepped back as if he'd been touched by fire, and maybe he had. That fire had always burned bright between them even now that they had children. However, they'd never been this far apart before, and Alex had never felt a distance from Max until now. She had to bring him back, because she didn't like the unusual glower in his eyes. She wanted the warmth he'd always exhibited toward her. She wanted to feel his shaft, and she moved her hand downward. Her fingers slid down his muscular chest, down past his waist to palm his cock, but Max pinned her in place with his cold eyes. This had been a first. Never had she been discouraged when it came to Max and sex. She moved closer to him where her body was flushed against his, where she could smell the scent of his body, and he could smell hers too. They were like two animals in heat every time they were near each other. He stared down at her, and his wide, impressive chest moved up and down as his breathing grew stronger and more intense. Without Alex knowing or approving, Max whisked her into his arms. She gazed into his cool eyes and questioned, "Where are you going with me?" He headed down the hall and kicked open a guest room, brought Alex to the bed, and dropped her in it without a word. "Take off your clothes or I will rip them off your body," he barked. Had he planned on punishing her for being in the bed with Jonas, she didn't know. She just did as he requested, as quick as possible. Alex thought that maybe this would save her marriage, because she understood how Max felt about her. She assumed he'd become excited and aroused by the sight of finding her and Jonas sleeping together. Maybe that had his cock as hard as it was when she touched it. Alex knew how jealous Max was, and maybe she could use that jealous nature to arouse him to a point that he wouldn't want to lose her, and give her time to explain about the misunderstanding. She knew, if she could tell him her side of the story, and he had time to mull over it, he would laugh about what had happened, and she would be back with him and her children. Alex thought about protecting Jonas as well, and maybe Max would welcome him back once he'd realized what Jonas had gone through, and all this was just an innocent mistake. Surly Max wouldn't be so heartless as to send Jonas away. She'd been in Jonas's arms through no fault of her own. He'd been drunk, and when he fell across the bed with his arms wrapped tightly around Alex, she couldn't pry them from her. She'd been forced to fall with him onto the bed where he kept her in his tight grip as he slept, and eventually she'd fallen asleep as well, and Max walked into an opened house to find them together in the same bed. This wasn't her fault, she thought, and neither was it Jonas's. Max had to understand this, but she couldn't tell him now. Now, when she laid naked in front of him, with him ready to claim what is obviously his. It wasn't Alex's fault, and it wasn't Jonas's fault. It was the fault of the circumstances that they found each other at the crossroads of their lives. And for Max to find them together the way he had, it had to have been a sign. But what sign was that? She didn't believe in divine intervention. Alex and Jonas thought Max had died in a plane crash, and they were inconsolable. The only support they had was with each other. After all, they'd been family, and the only ones left in the Blackstone family was Jonas, Alex, and Max's children. They thought that was all that was left of their small family, because the head of that family had been assumed to be dead. What more could Max expect? What more could he want from her? Max's searing, sexy voice broke through her thoughts. "Turn on your stomach," Max said with a low, breathless, dominant voice. "I want to look at you," Max insisted as his hand caressed her smooth porcelain skin. She turned hurriedly, as he had requested. Then Alex felt the sting from his palm, and the pain and heat coursing through her body arousing her. She wouldn't cry out or say a word because she knew Max needed to get out his frustrations and hurt, so she gave in to the violent way he spanked her ass. "I need to mark you because you're mine," he said, as she heard him toe off his shoes, rip the shirt from his body, and then unbuckle his belt. She thought he'd try to use his belt on her, but that's one thing she'd never stand for, and he knew it. Nevertheless, she'd used that belt on him many times when he'd begged her to, when there was nothing else, and they were away from home the way they are now. But she thought he'd changed by the look in his eyes, and he wanted to punish her in ways he'd never done before. Alex felt the bed dip. He sat on his thighs and then leaned over her and pushed her hair to the side. It wasn't as loving as before, where he'd gently reach and lay a swath of her hair on the pillow, after lowering his head to smell it, and then compliment her on how wonderful and fragrant it smelled. Then she felt the warmth of his mouth as he leaned in, kissed her neck. His mouth eased down her back. Each lick of his tongue brought chills to her skin. "I want to see your face when you make love to me," Alex pleaded in a soft voice, her face filling the pillow. "You will have plenty of time to see my face, but for now I don't want to see yours," Max said with the coolness of a stranger. Alex should have resisted, moved away from him, done anything until he did as she'd asked, but she made that mistake, and before she could take a breath, his hands were between her legs, his arm resting under her stomach when he pulled her up on all fours, and as quick as that happened, he stroked his shaft and droved inside her opening when she wasn't ready for him. A gasp and a moan filled the air. Max didn't care. He wanted to fuck Alex hard, punish her for what he didn't know, and at this time he didn't care. All he cared about was not making love to her, but fucking her hard and ruthlessly. He'd always made love to Alex, even when they'd tied each other up. He'd spanked her, and she'd used a crop on him each time. It was love between the two of them. There was no one who could say it wasn't love, because no one but them existed in their room of pain, in their world of Max and Alex Blackstone. It was their way of loving each other. Few would have understood it, but they did. However, now it was something entirely different, and Alex knew it. She felt it as Max drove deeper inside her and never called out her name. All she heard were the groans of pleasure from his lips, and the smothered pain from hers. Alex wanted to feel his body, and she did. It was cold, not in temperature but without feelings. She never thought this would happen to them. He fucked her body ruthlessly, not made love to her. She heard him moan as he was pushed inside her and pulled out. She didn't feel his warm lips caress her back as before. She felt him orgasm, and never stopped to ask if she wanted him to continue, but continue he did, until her body felt like a rag doll, as he pushed in and pulled out, fucking her for what appeared like hours in a position that was wearing her down, rotating from her opening, plunging into her anus, always with her on her stomach. These were hard limits Max ignored with Alex. Alex would let him finish abusing her in whatever fashion he chose, because she knew he'd been hurt by everything, and he'd been in an accident, and maybe he wasn't himself. But when it was over, she would lay down the rules, and afterwards she'd tell him how she felt about him and their sex life, and how it needed to be strengthened. Finally, she'd tell him she owed him a special kind of sexual punishment. One he wouldn't enjoy. Chapter 2. Alex woke with the sun flowing through the white shutters. She was sore as if her body had been invaded, and it had. At some point she'd just given in to Max, and let him have her the way he'd wanted, with her lying there sore and unable to move. Normally Max would have been lying with her exhausted, cuddling with her, complaining that he'd been bad, he deserved whatever punishment Alex deemed necessary, and she would eventually satisfy herself. At home she'd order him to go to their room, where she'd handcuff him, have her way with him, because when he was restrained, his cock always hard, and she'd suck him off in seconds, and the next moment he'd be hard again, waiting for whatever punishment she could think of, because she'd tell him not to have an orgasm, and he would. Only Alex had that kind of effect on Max. She alone could bring him to orgasm, and that's how it had always been since she'd met and fallen in love with him. It was her he needed to find peace and to sleep at night. It was her who would bring him out of the darkness of his mind, give him strength, and renew his body for all the work he had to perform when running billion-dollar companies. Well, he'd slept, however. Now she wasn't sleeping in his arms as they had always done, and he wasn't in the bed beside her, holding her. Where the fuck was Max? Alex shrugged her arms into one of the large shirts she'd found in the closet. Perhaps it belonged to Jonas. She didn't know, and she didn't care. It was time to talk to Max. It was time for her to tell him what happened last night, and now that he'd rested his mind by having sex, she felt he'd listen to her. Barely walking, hobbling along, she passed Jonas's bedroom, and when she glanced inside, he was gone too. Then she headed for the kitchen, and she slowed down in front of the master bedroom, realizing what had happened in there last night. A chill crossed her body even as the door remained closed with yellow tape, preventing anyone from entering. She hurried past it to go to the kitchen. As she entered the kitchen, she smelled coffee brewing, and saw Jonas sitting with his head down, resting in his hands, and looking into his coffee cup. "Are you okay, Jonas?" Of course, he wasn't okay. His wife, he thought he'd be with the rest of his life, had been killed by her lover in their bedroom, while he slept next to her drunk. His wife's lover had committed suicide in their bedroom. How the fuck could he be all right? "I'm good," he admitted, his wide, intense blue eyes turned up to greet Alex. "It's not the first time I've seen death." He reached for his cup with shaky hands, and had to hold it to his mouth with both palms. Alex knew that Jonas wasn't good. How could he be? She wandered over to him, and she wrapped her arms around his chest and laid her head on his back, and he leaned his head into her breast and cried like a young boy. "It will be all right, Jonas. Don't keep it in. I'm here for you. Max is here." It was then Jonas raised his head and passed his thumb under his eyes, and his eyes lit up. "Where's Max? I thought he was dead. My God, is it true he's here?" There was life in his eyes now once he knew Max was there. "I thought it was a dream. I thought I heard him talking to you. So it's not in my head." "He was here last night. We slept in one of the bedrooms," Alex replied. Jonas hopped off the bar stool and ran to the terrace and opened up the doors and peered out. "Is he swimming?" "I don't see him," Jonas yelled, after leaning out through the open door, then calling Max's name several times. Alex stood alarmed, her heart beating so hard she thought it would burst through her chest. She rushed to the patio door, standing beside Jonas. Then she pushed past him to stand on the outside for a better look. She placed her palm to her mouth. Her eyes wandered across the sand and into the water, and nothing, only one early morning swimmer. Alex ran out, closer to the water to get a better look, and it wasn't Max. She would know him anywhere. She'd known that handsome face with thick dark hair, eyes deep blue like the ocean currents, shoulders wide and muscular, legs long and firm. No, that man waiting in the ocean water wasn't Max. The man rising from the tide was an older man. As he rose, and Alex got a better look at him, her heart sank. Alex's heart hammered in her chest as she rushed back to Jonas. "It's not him," she cried out. Then she hurried to find her phone. When she located it, she fumbled to swipe her thumb over it. Damn, what's taking it this long? She read a message that she thought she'd never read again. Normally, he'd never send her a text. He would have written a letter. He knew how she detested him leaving her notes and letters, but she didn't see why he had to text her. It seemed too impersonal that he would do such a thing. "Why didn't he wake me?" she voiced at a stunned Jonas. Alex became afraid to read further. But she had to. She gathered her fears and strength, and she realized that she would need all the strength she could muster to get through this text and through this day. She inhaled and then exhaled and read the text. "Max. Alex. I can't go on like this. I know none of this was your fault because it had to be Jonas, but you are his enabler, the same way I was. He has managed to come between me and you, and my love for you is strained. I'm going home to take care of our children. Don't bother coming home. We should try to find other people that we can be happy with. You appeared to be happy with Jonas, and not me anymore. Stay with him. He needs you in ways I don't." Falling into the chair, Alex narrowed her eyes and furrowed her brow. Chills once again covered her body to the point that her hair prickled with pain. Anger and bitterness hadn't set in yet. She didn't think Max knew what he was saying. He was just acting out of jealousy and his own pain. "What is it, Alex? What's happened to Max?" Jonas questioned, standing and looking over her shoulder, and then turning her around to see her eyes. Handing the phone off to Jonas, Alex stared into the house out through the glass doors, reaching the sand, and reaching into the ocean. She saw the tide move out and she didn't know what to do, and then she took a full breath in and exhaled once more. "Why the fuck would Max say something so hurtful to you, Alex?" Jonas ranted after reading the text. "Maybe he'd had enough of me and you," Alex said, bringing her attention back to Jonas. "He saw us lying in bed together, and maybe he snapped. I'd never seen that darkness in his eyes, not for me. I'm not his blood. My children and you are. I'm perhaps someone disposable. I felt that way when I first met him. I was just an outlet to create the family he'd lost, keep you occupied, and take care of you while he left to handle business like the man he'd paid to watch me, and when that didn't work out he rid himself of him." "You don't think he had Robert?" "No. But he didn't prevent Robert from killing himself. I don't know what to think anymore, but I wouldn't bet on anything Max might do now. I don't really know Max. I would have been the last one to think that after all we'd been through, that he'd walk out on me and hurt me the way he did now. I know that he's vicious enough to take my children from me because he tried it once before. I think he wants to break me, Jonas," Alex said, her voice pleading for an answer. When she didn't get it from Jonas, she uttered, "If Max thinks I'll give up my children when I fought him to keep them, then he doesn't know me." Alex ambled over to the couch and sat. Then she glanced around and rose in a huff. "Where are you going, Alex?" "To bring Maximilian Blackstone to his knees." Alex meant that figuratively and literally. She had enough faith in herself that she knew if Max didn't mean what he'd said to her, he would regret the day he sent her that text.